Hey y'all, welcome to Most of It, where I talk about most things that I find interesting. Today, we'll be continuing our series covering the entire 40k timeline. And just to catch you up real quick, last time I made a video covering the War in Heaven, so go check that out if you're interested. And today, we'll be covering the Eldari Empire and the rise of humanity. So without further ado, let's get into this. For the race of the Eldari, they had just come off of a brutal conflict with the Catan and the Necrons, in which their creators, the Old Ones, were destroyed. However, they were not without masters. Throughout the War in Heaven, the Eldari fought alongside massively powerful warp entities which they worshipped as gods. It's unclear whether these gods were made by the Old Ones or if they were formed from the thoughts and emotions of the Eldari, but this Eldari pantheon included some familiar faces, such as Cain, the god of war, Kegarak, the trickster god, Isha, the goddess of fertility, and Ennead, god of the dead, and hundreds more that we don't know about. With the Necrons having gone to sleep after shattering the Catan, the Eldari alongside their gods took control of the galaxy, as just about no one was able to stop them. The Eldari would use their webway for travel, and thus, despite being the masters of the warp through use of their psychic abilities, they didn't really have any need to contend with the dangers of it. It was said that nothing was beyond the reach of the Eldari, and they explored and learned the secrets of the stars. None could pose a threat to beings as magnificent as these, and not even death itself could claim them. To the Eldari, even staples such as food and sleep became unnecessary, and so, with no need to really work or fight for survival, they began exploring and creating the arts. Music, paintings, plays, and sculptures were what the Eldari would spend their time doing. But to beings as advanced as these, they became bored after a few millennia of the same thing, and so they tried something new and different, and soon became bored of that. The arts became more extreme and even violent, but what did it matter? Even those Eldari who were killed could simply be reborn. Meanwhile, far away from the Eldari Empire on a little planet called Earth, there sprouted up a race known as humanity, and this is where we begin to get actual numbers to apply to the timeline. Humanity began as it did here with us, and the history of Earth is roughly the same as real life. That means that you watching this video are a part of the 40k timeline. Congratulations. But a few things were obviously different. For one, chaos is a thing, and thanks to the War in Heaven, it was growing. It began to manifest itself in humanity through shamans in the 8th millennium or 8000 BC. These shamans would see the growing threat of chaos in the warp and would decide to do something about it. Together, thousands of psyker shamans poisoned themselves at the same time and died, and as their souls flooded into the warp, before the entities there could devour them, they combined and became one being they called the New Man. 1 year later, a child was born in what is current-day Turkey. This child would be an immortal psychic powerhouse of a being that we know as the Emperor. He would grow and gain more power over time and would even have a good following for a bit. If you want more details about his life, I made a video about him, so go check it out. But eventually he decided he would be a more subtle guiding hand for humanity, until the time came for him to reveal himself. Meanwhile, chaos is manifesting here and there, but they weren't very strong, due to the Eldar gods also being warp entities and absorbing almost all the thoughts and emotions of the Eldar. But suddenly, here was a race on Earth that didn't worship the Eldar gods and still had a decent warp presence. Chaos began to feed on humanity until the time came for the gods we know and love to awake. Now keep in mind that, as with most things chaos related, this is still kind of up in the air, but it's been said in the past, and I like it from a narrative perspective, so we're rolling with it. It's said that all three gods awoke during humanity's Middle Ages, with Khorne being the first, thanks to the wars and bloodshed of the time. Tzeentch was the second, being awoken by the advancements in knowledge and politics, and Nurgle being the third, awoken by the Black Plague sweep across Europe. Humanity would continue to grow, and throughout all this time, the Emperor would foresee what paths should be taken and would subtly coax humanity along them. They would advance greatly and would do typical sci-fi stuff, taking to the stars, colonizing planets, terraforming Mars, and forming your standard sci-fi utopia and all that jazz. Until the 15th millennium, when what's called the Dark Age of technology began. Around this time, chaos had grown more powerful from feeding off of humanity's thoughts and emotions, and thus more and more human psychers began popping up, and the warp drive was invented, allowing humanity to use the warp as a means of traversal. This allowed humanity to colonize more worlds quicker than before, and we began to see what are called night worlds form. The Imperial Knights? Well, this is where they came from, and their original purposes were for logging, mining, and farming. But one of the things that were used pretty heavily throughout all this advancement was AI, which humanity called the Men of Iron. And have you seen Terminator? Yeah, that's what happened. The Men of Iron woke up and said nuh-uh to everything and began killing humanity. Have you ever wondered why AIs are outlawed and called abominable intelligences in modern 40k? Well, this is why. The Men of Iron's revolt threw a wrench into everything and pretty much destroyed all of humanity's interstellar supply lines and cut off communication to all outer worlds as well, meaning they were on their own. And to add insult to injury, the human psychers that had been popping up began to be used by Chaos as portals into real space, with demons tearing their way through a psyker's mind. The Dark Age of technology would end around the 25th millennium and would usher in a new age called the Age of Strife, or Old Night. During the Men of Iron's revolt, the Emperor would begin laying the groundwork for his great plan, and through some genetic shenanigans would create the first Custodes and Thunder Warriors. The Thunder Warriors were essentially prototype Space Marines, but with a touch of instability. The Emperor would also go to the planet Moloch, where he would find a portal into the realm of chaos and would enter it, and it's believed there he would strike some kind of bargain with the Chaos Gods and would emerge greatly empowered. But back to the Age of Strife. As you can probably tell, humanity's in rough shape right now, and as you can probably also tell by the name of this age, it doesn't get much better. Humanity was able to beat the Men of Iron, but it left a lot of worlds, including Earth, as bombed out wastelands. Humans began fighting each other for their own rapidly dwindling resources, and this is the time period that caused humanity to gain a large hatred towards Psykers, as the demon incursions became more frequent and they began to murder Psykers on sight. And just a cherry on this sucky cake, the Quarks began showing back up, except they had devolved from their massive hulking size and had become the orcs that we know and love. There aren't too many specifics to mention on humanity's end, just a bunch of mayhem and murder during this time. But on the Eldari side of things, this is where it gets really interesting. Do you remember how I said that they began to entertain themselves in, let's say, extreme ways? Well, they didn't stop, and fell into a depravity that would not end well for them. Pleasure cults were rampant, with their only purpose being to, as their name implies, pleasure themselves in their pursuit of entertainment. There were those of the Eldari who abstained from such activities and foresaw the dark destiny that awaited their race, but they were largely ignored. As the bloody orgy of the Eldari continued, these Farseers, as they were called, would flee aboard massive craft worlds, and become known as the Exodites. Left alone in their hedonism, the remaining Eldari got even worse. But remember how I said that the warp feeds off of emotions and thoughts, and that the Eldari are a very psychically powerful race? Well, all of these corrupt Eldar acts began to coalesce in the warp over thousands of years, causing massive warp storms to pop up in real space, which contributed to humanity's Age of Strife. This would continue until the late 30th millennium, when the collection of the Eldar's thoughts within the warp awoke and burst forth. Slaanesh was born, and her birth would unleash a psychic scream across the warp and real space, which would kill all Eldari within its radius, with their souls being consumed by this new god. Slaanesh's birth would also tear a hole in real space, which would come to be known as the Eye of Terror. Most of the Eldari's gods would be consumed by Slaanesh, with only 3 surviving, those being Kegarak, who hid himself within the webway, Cain, who tried to fight back and was shattered and scattered for his troubles, and Isha, who was saved by Nurgle as Slaanesh was about to consume her. Lucky her. This would be known as the Fall of the Eldar, with every single Eldar world becoming a deserted wasteland, and Slaanesh laying claim upon every Eldar soul. The Exodites were spared immediate destruction for the most part, but they did not escape unscathed. Every Eldar that would die from this point on would have their soul immediately devoured by Slaanesh, and to add insult to injury, the once unmatched psychic race could no longer call upon their psychic powers to the same degree, for Slaanesh would see it and pursue them. Some surviving Eldar within the webway would find that if they committed horrid acts, they could ward off Slaanesh's consumption, and they came to be known as the Dark Eldar or the Drukhari. So yeah, the 25th to the 30th millennium was rough for just about everybody, but a light would appear for humanity at least around the end of the 30th millennium, when the Emperor saw that Slaanesh's birth had removed many of the warp storms that were impeding human travel and communication. He would emerge and become the greatest warlord on Terra, and would unite the world through use of his Thunder Warriors and Custodes, and would destroy any that opposed him. This would be known as the Unification Wars, and at the beginning of the 31st millennium, he would set his eyes on the stars. He would make a new kind of warrior called the Astartes, or Space Marines, and now that he had new and better warriors, he, let's say, retired the more unstable Thunder Warriors. But in order to bring the light of science to the stars, he would need the tech to actually get there, and this is where Mars comes into play. Remember how I said that humanity terraformed Mars? Well, the people living there were left on their own during the Age of Strife, and would begin a civil war with different factions nuking each other and turning Mars back into the red wasteland that it used to be. Many would take shelter underground, with their food and water and even their air they breathed being provided by the machinery around them. Over time, this life-saving tech became something like gods to the people, and those who knew how to repair it became like priests. And this is where the cult Mechanicus comes into scene. After a few millennia, the people came back above ground and brought their worship of tech with them. Mars became a powerhouse of production and development, and this is when the Emperor showed up and offered them a deal. He would make a pact with them, which essentially said, you can keep practicing your religion if you make all the stuff that I need. Now, the Emperor himself was a genius in pretty much every way, including tech, and the Mechanicus legends spoke of an Omnissiah, the avatar of the machine god, and so they obviously took the Emperor to be him and accepted his deal. Now having the means to execute his grand plans with the partnership of Terra and Mars and the warriors to fight for it in the Astartes, the Emperor only needed one more thing: people to lead those warriors, and he knew just how to get them. But that's for next time. Thanks for watching, y'all. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and comment down below what topics or characters you'd like to see me cover next. Also check out my community tab where I'm currently running weekly Primarch battle brackets, and stay tuned for part 3. And with all that said, see y'all later.